I'm really grateful to be here again at the Stars and Stones Forum. I was lucky enough to be at the first one as well, talking about my other area of research, which is based upon earth energies and scientific analysis of how they used them for seed production in ancient times. But today I'm coming back to my hometown of Cambridge, where I was brought up and lived there for the first 25 years of my life. Since the age of 8 years old, I lived in Cherry Hinton, which is a small village not far from Wandlebury, and I always used to go up Wandlebury as a child and as a teenager and in my early 20s as well for various other things, and I was very drawn to the place, had a real good feeling about it. It's always been regarded as an Iron Age hill fort by the archaeologists and historians of the area, but the research of the O'Briens, Christian and Barbara Joy O'Brien, in the 70s has kind of rewritten, it's helped rewrite the history of this place, and it's stimulated a whole area of research for myself and others at Wandlebury. When I was quite young, I did hear of stories about a place called the Giant's Grave, which is at the other end of Cherry Hinton, at the base of the Gog's Hill, and there's a spring there as well. And there was a story that giants were buried there, and they actually found skeletons. And I kept hearing about this, but I kind of thought nothing of it. I thought it was just some kind of myth. But recently I found that actually on the top of Limekiln Hill, which is just past Wandlebury, just past Cherry Hinton on the way to Wandlebury, there's a site that was excavated in the about over 100 years ago, and actually did find some giant skeletons there. So the Giant's Grave theory, which has been sort of floating around at the school, because our school, Netherhall, was actually on the side of the Gog's Hills. It kind of became, we didn't really know anything about it, but just at the top of the hill we used to go running in and playing in as kids. It was actually a very ancient site, which it was termed the War Ditches, which we'll have a look at this site as well later. But further over the hills, towards Great Shelford and Stapleford, we have Wandlebury, which is the site I'm going to be focusing on today. So when I first read a book called The Son of the Serpent by Hamish Miller and Paul Broadhurst, this really opened up a whole avenue of research for me. I was never interested in history at school. I don't know anyone who was, actually. But for me, I found it incredibly boring. All the kings of Britain, who won the wars, no interest at all. I wasn't compelled. I didn't want to look any further into the past. I read the book The Son of the Serpent, and that opened up a whole avenue of understanding about the subtle nature of history and the way the ancients actually worked with the landscape, and they worked with these sacred sites. And I quickly noticed that Wandlebury was actually on the Mary line, the famous energy line of the Son of the Serpent fame, and this really triggered a whole awakening for me into this area of subtle energies research across the landscape. And also, obviously, it connects directly with Avebury and Glastonbury, and I now live in Glastonbury partly because of this, just to sort of continue various research down there. And interestingly, when I first went to Glastonbury about 6 years ago now, it was actually on the tail of the Girt Dog of Langport. I actually got given a copy of this book. I didn't know anything about it before, and this is the snappily titled book by Christian and Barbara Joy O'Brien, called An Integrated Astronomical Complex of Earthworks at Wandlebury in Hatfield Forest from the 3rd millennium BC, published in 1976. So the first day I ever went and experienced the Glastonbury Zodiac, which Yuri talked about earlier, I went to the tail of the Girt Dog of Langport, and David Hatfield gave me this book immediately. I just couldn't believe it. It was kind of like one of them beautiful synchronicities. It really helped open up, my area of research at Wandlebury. So it's that whole thing where you have to go a long way away to another part of the sacred landscape of your home country to actually find stuff about your hometown and your home sacred sites. So and to look at it from another perspective, it really enabled me to look at it clearly and from a sort of, just stand back and actually re-look at the landscape. And since then, the research and the megalithic finds have just cascaded. And I met Edmund Marriage as well, through Nigel Blair. And the research has really opened up. So there's a whole load of different aspects I really want to look at today. Oh, excuse me a second. Mainly, obviously, at the research of Christian and Barbara Joy O'Brien, and evidence which backs up their claims that there was this incredible megalithic alignment stretching from Wandlebury all the way down to Hatfield Forest, which virtually follows the M11, if anyone knows that motorway. So I'm really asking, was this 26-mile alignment designed and built by the same people who built Avebury, Silbury Hill and the early part of Stonehenge? Because according to the O'Briens, we are looking at a similar time frame, which is roughly 2500 BC. And there's quite a few other aspects we can look at as well. For instance, I mean, there's a whole story about Wandlebury, really, that stretches back for different eras of history, going back about 5,000 years. So first of all, I'm going to look at the landscape of the Gog Magog Hills and have a look at what that name really means, and the giants and how they're associated with that. And also other legends associated with that, and the discovery of chalk hill figures, which Tom Lethbridge, or T.C. Lethbridge, discovered in the 1950s, which are very controversial because the archaeologists and historians aren't having it. They're basically saying he made them up. But we'll have a quick look at that as well. And obviously the Loxodrome alignment, have a good look at that, and new discoveries on it, and Neolithic evidence to back that up. And even the archaeologists are now saying the whole Wandlebury area is actually a Neolithic ritual landscape, and it's not just a single so-called Iron Age hill fort, according to other earlier historians. So we're going to look at some other ley lines, or straight line alignments, which go from Wandlebury, because the Loxodrome initially, Christian O'Brien was quite inspired by a talk he went to about ley lines and about Alfred Watkins' theory. So we're going to have a look at some other lays around that area as well, and also the earth energies, particularly, obviously, the Mary energy line, and the Avebury and Silbury Hill connections. And very interestingly, there's a book called Where Troy Once Stood, which claims that the whole Troy saga, the Iliad and the Odyssey, and the whole great wars that took place in the Bronze Age, were actually based at Wandlebury and that whole Gog Magog Hills area. And I was quite intrigued by that, because I've been talking to a couple of archaeologists in Cambridge who claim that there's a huge amount of evidence to now back that up. And the new version of his book, Ivan Wilkins, he's building the case very well. And we'll have a look at some of the key points of that a little bit later. So I'm really asking, were the megalithic builders of Wandlebury, were these people who built the ancient sites, the famous ancient sites all across Britain and possibly the world, actually in our local landscape of East Anglia? This is a nice painting by Richard Relham from 1801, which shows you the kind of basic, it's quite an exaggerated version of what the hill fort actually looks like. It's basically a large ring ditch, but this is very exaggerated. This looks more like Avebury at a glance, doesn't it? But I just wanted to show you this is how it was seen back in the early 1800s. But Wandlebury itself is based upon the Gog Magog Hills, and we'll have a look at the hills first. So I want to sort of put it into like context, sort of landscape context of what we're going to talk about today. Number one, giants were found at the war ditches, which I've already mentioned. So a lot of people relate Gog Magog to be these giants. We'll have a look at that in a moment. In the 1950s, children from Cherry Hinton were warned to stay away from the hills because they might wake the giants. In 1574, a special decree was issued forbidding Cambridge University students from frequenting the Gog Magog Hills, and a fine would be imposed if they did. And also, obviously, we have the Giant's Grave back in Cherry Hinton. We'll have a look at that site next. And that's obviously a reference to Gog Magog. And also, it's and there's a stone next door to the Giant's Grave in the Robert Hood and Little John pub, which is another reference to giants. So one of the earliest reports of the Gog Magog Hills having that name is from Michael Drayton in the Polly Albion 1/20th song. I'll just read this out to you, because this is quite a nice little piece. "O Gog Magog, a hill of long and great renown, which near to Cambridge fet, Orm looks the learned town." The rest of the song tells a story about how the giant fell in love with a nymph called Granta, which is actually the original name of the River Cam. And however hard he tried to woo her by tempting her with presents and changing his appearance, she still rejected him. Ah, okay. So he's probably got a little bit of a complex since then. So this is the Giant's Grave, and this is the megalith that I discovered there. I mean, I used to actually go to this pub, the Robin Hood and Little John pub, in my late teenage years. And you can see that it's actually got a great big footprint in it as well, which is the same size as my foot, which is size 10.5. Which I almost got it stuck in there, actually. This is the Giant's Grave, which is just over the road. You can see this here, and this is a sort of winter photo. There's actually a tumuli in this little dip as well. It sort of dips down into this little part, and you can just see it on the crossroads at the end of Cherry Hinton, at the very base of Limekiln Hill. It's a very interesting little place. And it's a natural spring, also called Spring Head, Robin Hood Dip, and Spring Field as well, it was named. And it was one of the sources of water for Cambridge, fresh water for the whole of Cambridge, as the streams run through the town. But this megalith really intrigues me, because it's a quite large one. You can see how big it is there, really. It's not that far, surprisingly. If you continue the Loxodrome alignment, which we'll look at shortly, it actually is not that far from the alignment. So it could be another marker stone actually on the alignment itself. And we'll come back and recheck that alignment later. So the Gog Magog, there's also the stories in London and about the founding of London. The Gog Magog effigies that have been in London for a very long time, since the time of Henry V. Originally they were burnt down in the Great Fire of 1666, but they were rebuilt by Richard Saunders in 1708. In Gigantic History from 1741, Thomas Borman states that the effigies were placed in London in honour of the giants who tried to defend their liberty of their home country when Brutus invaded, which echoes Cornish legends and also the legends of the London Stone, the only surviving megalith in London and now in Cannon Street. The story with the stone is very similar. If the stone is moved, then London will be in danger. It's a very basic kind of story. Again, the effigies were again destroyed in World War II and they were rebuilt again in 1953. And they're still paraded through the town at every Lord Mayor's show every year. So there must be some kind of legendary, mythological something that these people believe in London, the high echelons of power in London. So, and we have the same name obviously with the Gog Magog Hills. In ancient history, Gog and Gog are mentioned frequently, but the mystery is a real mystery to the real source of this name, especially how the hills got this name itself. I'll just read through these very briefly. Magog, son of Japheth, was in the book of Genesis. Gog, the king of Magog, appears in the Old Testament in Ezekiel as the instigator of a terrible battle. Presented as men, supernatural beings, giants and demons, national groups or lands, and they appear in mythology in many different stories. Gog Magog and Gog Magot are identified with giants in Spenser's Fairy Queen. Geoffrey of Monmouth's influential 12th century Historia Regum Britannica talks about that Gog Magog was a giant slain by the Cornish hero Corin, or Corinius, who threw himself into the sea at Plymouth. Legends of the Irish God Kings as well. This was noted by Christian O'Brien in the Wandlebury Hatfield Forest book, and this was to do with this sort of, the Tuatha Dé Danann. Is Ogma Grian, or Anek, Ogma of the Sun Countenance, and also we have other things like they think it was related to sun learning and Ogma the Sun Sage. So these hills are somehow related to the sun, and possibly a solstice kind of alignment or awareness or knowledge being passed on through history, and that's been remembered in the name. And I think that is a clue to why Wandlebury was built, especially when we start looking at the Loxodrome and the whole Wandlebury complex as a possible astronomical observatory. So this is just a plan of Wandlebury. You can actually see this when you go there, just outside the main ring. It's about 1,000 feet across. There's a main large ditch, sort of henge that goes all the way around with a higher outer bank. And in the bank itself, there's been dips cut in at 6 main dips around the main circle. And these mark interesting, if you were to stand in the centre, these mark interesting sunrise, sunset, moonrise, moonset points. And there's also, in the directly north of the circle as well, there's a gap in the bank there as well. So whether they were trying to use it as a marker for the North Star, we're not too sure about that. But obviously it's been used and used over the years, over many thousands of years possibly. Technically they think it began being built at 400 BC, but new evidence, new archaeological evidence, as well as suggestions by the O'Briens in their early work, find that it's actually much older, and there was an early part of the structure, and then later it was added to much later. So there's a lot of activity here. And also within the main ring, there's actually 3 inner henges as well, very smaller ones within the actual ring itself. So there was like several different layers of history we're talking about here. And here is where the Chalk Hill figures were supposed to have been discovered by Tom Lethbridge, which we'll have a look at shortly. So the Chalk Hill figures, they're just on the south slope. It's quite a steep slope just south of the main ring, as we just saw, and this is what he discovered. Basically in 1955 he was a director of excavations for the Cambridge Antiquarian Society, and he recounted certain legends of the area and the story of Osbert, which we'll have a look at in a moment. And so he started digging with these in mind. He used metal rods to punch the ground to find soft areas which he believed would mark out this particular Chalk Hill figure. He even found a chariot in the design as well, which links to another legend of the area, that either at Fleam Dyke or Wandlebury, a golden chariot was buried there. And it was these were where he kind of got his inspirations from. So, you know, stories of ghostly nights and people in the distant past recording that they actually saw these kind of figures in the landscape of Wandlebury many hundreds of years ago. So Gervase of Tilbury wrote of a dark night rider who no mortal could defeat, who appeared at summer solstice in Wandlebury Ring. But so a Norman knight called Osbert took up the challenge, and he had to say, "Knight to knight, come forth." And the ghostly knight appeared, and they had a battle, and he appeared to beat the ghostly knight, and he took his horse away, but the ghostly knight came back to life and threw a spear in Osbert's leg, and he was wounded, and then the horse mysteriously disappeared, and every year on the summer solstice after that, his wound would reopen. So to me, that's a real sign of an ancient legend of summer solstice observations. I think I can safely sort of say that. So in 1605, Bishop Jovis Hall described a picture the scholars of Cambridge go to see at the Hogmahog Hills of a giant called Al Paunch. So again, referencing a possible chalk hill figure in the landscape there. In 1640, historian John Lawyer wrote of a giant within the trench of Wandlebury Camp, cut there by students at the university. And he's suggesting that was actually inside the main circle, but this, what Lethbridge discovered, was just outside it to the south. In the 1720s, Dr. Dale found a gigantic figure cut on the turf in the middle of the camp, and William Cole, the antiquary, remembered seeing the figure of a giant carved on the turf of Wandlebury. Again, this reference is inside the circle, so look, there is the debate about that with the fact that he discovered outside the circle, you know, on the south-facing slope. There's also, as I mentioned, stories of a buried gold chariot and treasure at Wandlebury, and possibly a fleeing dyke, which is a massive earthwork further northeast, which also led Tom Lethbridge to the chalk hill figures theory too. And he wrote a book about it. I've got a copy of it in my bag somewhere. It's a remarkable book actually, but there's a lot of speculation there, and eventually the archaeologists and historians discredited his research, and it's now completely grown over and there's no evidence left of it at all. Which is a bit unfortunate, because it would be quite a pull for people visiting Wandlebury. But interestingly, before I jump into that one, there was another, there has been possibly another chalk hill figure found in Cambridgeshire. There was the image of a sort of horse that they found shaped in a field about 6 miles southeast of Wandlebury. But there's no real evidence to back that up. It could just be a natural formation. So the interesting point here, I mean, before we get into the locks, I just want to have a look at some other quick alignments here. The red line here, this is the famous Cambridge Lay, which is the same as that one there, which goes through Wandlebury, and it goes through the chalk hill figures. But it starts here at a site called Wormwood Hill, which we'll have a look at in a moment, and goes all the way up through Cambridge, through some very interesting sites. It goes through Wart's Causeway Crossroads here, which is an ancient, two ancient trackways meeting. Sydney Sussex College, the Holy Sepulchre Church, or the Round Church, which is linked with the Knights Templar. St Clement's, then it goes to another great mound at the other end of town called Castle Mound, which is claimed to be a Norman mound, but there's evidence now that it's much, much older, and it was rebuilt on over and over again, and you can see the whole of Cambridge from it, and you can see actually the Wandlebury Hills from it quite clearly. Then it goes much further north, sort of northwest into St Andrews and Swavesey, then an ancient Benedictine priory, what used to be there. So there's very interesting, this lay is particularly interesting to me because it links, it's got Wormwood Hill, the chalk hill figures, and Wandlebury Ring, as well as all these other sites that we've mentioned. Just so you can see, the blue line is the Mary line, which I will talk about shortly, and the green one is the Loxodrome alignment. So Wormwood Hill, that's this point here. This is also used to be called the Dragon's Barrow, and it's a very large tumuli or burial mound, although it hasn't been excavated. I don't know if there's anything in there. It could be where the golden chariots are buried, as some people claim. So maybe we should get some shovels and go down there. But they planted trees over the whole of Wandlebury now. There didn't used to be any trees there because of the chalk sort of nature of it. And so that you can see for great distances on several of the horizons. And they think that basically you could see from Wandlebury all the way, from this hill all the way over possibly to Bartlow Hills, and also south towards Ring Hill down in Littlebury as well. And in a really, really old archaeology book I found from I think the 1910s, there was archaeology who claimed that was the case, because they found reports that there was no trees around the Littlebury area and no trees around the Wandlebury kind of hills area. This is just a quote from Andrew Collins in his book The Circle Makers, and about people who have very unusual experiences like Wormwood Hill. I want to bring this in because this particular ley line we've been looking at that goes through Cambridge, many of the sites, there's been lots of ghostly sightings and strange occurrences happening that have been recorded throughout history. He basically talks about how the guy who went up there, who was sensitive, was a sort of UFO investigator, he felt himself being engulfed by swirling bands of lights, but he went up to the mound anyway, sustained a powerful headache, an intense pressure on his chest and head, a bitter metallic taste, nausea and dizziness, and also the sound of a deep tonal note that resonated from the ground and rose in pitch the higher he climbed. And then he felt like he was having an out-of-body experiences, and he saw, with his psychic eyes, he saw priestly figures in saffron-coloured robes approaching the site in ceremonial fashion. So that's quite an interesting little, it's worth going up there just in case that might happen to you. Hasn't happened to me yet, unfortunately. I'll keep going there and trying. But there's also been other people I've met who've been up there, and they've had very unusual sensations. I went up there with the Gatekeeper Trust last week on a sort of day-long trip we were doing out to Wandlebury and the area. And I personally, I noticed that the energy there, you do notice it, the earth energy there is strong. I think it's like a big orgone generator. I think it's the same kind of power as Silbury Hill, and it's quite a big, when you look at it, you can't really see because it's covered in trees now, but it's a remarkable big mound. And it looked like it had a flat top as well, and very, very steep slope, sort of shallow sloping sides. It's almost pyramidical, but we think it's probably conical originally. So the Michael and Mary line. I just want to mention this. I think this is an important point about Wandlebury, and also the way it bisects the Loxodrome and the other ley line we looked at. Obviously, this was discovered by Hamish Miller and Paul Broadhurst in the 80s when they went to dowse the St Michael axis, which John Michell discovered in the late 60s, which he documented in his book The View Over Atlantis. And John Michell basically discovered this by observing that Glastonbury Tor and Burrow Mump, which Yuri kind of mentioned in this talk, were aligned to the Beltane sunrise and also Samhain sunset. So it's like an astroarchaeological alignment as well. And then he continued the line across the country and found all these sites dedicated to St Michael, many, many sites. And this became quite famous and has gone down in Earth Mysteries folklore. So this was later then dowsed. Hamish Miller, Paul Broadhurst, other researchers went there. They started down in Cornwall to actually dowse this particular alignment to see if they could find anything of interest, see if there was an energy line associated with it. They found a wiggly kind of line, a big earth energy line, actually kind of weaved in and around the main straight line alignment. And then when they got to Avebury, they spent a couple of months getting up to Avebury. They had to go all the way back because they found another great energy line there, which and they had to go back and start again and dowse that one too. So they had double the workload, and they called that one the Mary line because it had much more yin or feminine qualities. And here you can see where they dowsed it all across the country. Wandlebury is right up here, just on the Mary line. So we see that, all these famous sites that are on these particular alignments and these earth energy lines, there is a connection between Wandlebury and many of the sites across Britain, southern England, which are famous sites like Glastonbury, Avebury, all the way down to the Hurlers in Cornwall, St Michael's Mount. And there's even a whole theory that this goes all the way around the world, which some people call the Rainbow Serpent. In fact, I went to Peru recently and I found what I thought was the Michael and Mary line there. So I'm very intrigued that this possibly is a great earth energy circle which was developed and worked with by the ancients. So this is where it goes through Wandlebury. It's the blue line. It's a very rough map of it. And you'll see that I've marked a couple of crop circles on there as well, which I just want to sort of mention them as well because I think these are an important aspect of the whole sort of sacred landscape of the area. It's not just about just Wandlebury itself. This is the famous angel crop circle and the very large 666-foot one that appeared. This appeared right on the Mary line. In fact, it actually moved the Mary line off course into the crop circle. We'll have a look at that in a moment. Very unusual one, this one. This one appeared just north of the Gogmagog Hills and just sort of west of Wandlebury. Appeared in 3 stages. I didn't manage to get a photo of stage 1, which was just the main circle. and that bit there. But a few days later, it disappeared. It's like a maze kind of shape. This was 237 feet across. The big one was 666 feet. And then a few days after that, this was added to it. This bit here and this bit here. I think that bit there as well. So we're seeing like sort of different levels of construction. And I believe Carolyn, I don't know if she's here today, she did some interesting ceremonies and sort of work along the Lockstone a few weeks before this appeared. She claims that she was partly responsible, which is fine. But this, I found this quite intriguing because this really triggered a lot of people's interest in the whole landscape in the area around 2001, especially me. I wrote a few articles about this and put this out into some websites and into a couple of crop circle magazines, publications. And it caused quite a bit of interest at the time, but then this was overshadowed by a massive crop circle that appeared on Milk Hill that year in Wiltshire. So I just wanted to put that in there because I think this is an important aspect. And there's been many other crop circles appeared in the area as well. They're particularly around Wandlebury, around the Mary energy line. This is the one that appeared a few weeks later on actually on the Mary line, just the other side of the Gogmagogs, visible from Little Trees Hill, which is like a tumuli on top of the Gogmagogs. And it's a beautiful design. It reminds me of the golden torques they found in Ireland. And I think, you know, some people say, when you look at, you know, Michael Poinder, who's done a lot of research on this, he believes that the torques were used as an astronomical device to, you know, because if you look at the planispheres that Phillips produced now, they're very similar and they could be used in a similar way. I believe this is possibly a representation of that. So it's, to me, it's a little clue, you know, that whoever the crop circle makers are, perhaps they're our ancestors being really smart. And also here, you can see that the way all the circles here pushed over to one edge, yeah? That's exactly the same, not to the same dimensions, as Wandlebury, the inner ditches. All the inner ditches are pushed over and they meet at one edge, which I didn't know that until I discovered the O'Brien's research. So there's all these strange little clues you keep finding within these crop circles, and I like to keep bringing this in, the crop circles, because it causes a bit of controversy, and I think it's a valid part of the sacred landscape theories. So here's some other ones that have been discovered around Cambridgeshire. This famous one in '91. This was in Ickleton. This is on the Michael line, which is you know, the actual Earth. They think this was actually directly on the Michael Earth energy line. Very strange stories around this one. It's remarkably difficult to even draw it on paper, let alone produce it in a field of that magnitude. And there was a story that there were glowing lights and UFOs seen the night before it appeared as well. And exactly 1 year before, in the New Scientist, to the day, 1 year before, in the New Scientist magazine, there was a report that someone actually sent in a letter claiming, when will there be, you know, all these crop circles keep appearing, when will there be one of the actual Mandelbrot set? It appears exactly 1 year later, which I thought was quite interesting. This one was '93. This is the first mandala design ever in the crop circle world. This is a place called Bythorn. And these are some that appeared in '96. These are actually very close to the ley line we looked at earlier, going north through Cambridge, northwest through Cambridge, in Girton. And this is the Mowing Devil, which is in the 1600s in Hertfordshire from a wood cutting, which is not that far from Cambridgeshire and Essex. So let's get on to the Loxodrome. Just giving you a background of some of the research I've been looking at over the years at Wandlebury. This is the alignment itself. This is Christian O'Brien. This is the big stone. And this is a newspaper report that came out on March the 19th, 1978 in the Sunday Observer magazine. If that's correct, I think that's correct, yeah. And there's like several pages talking about their theory of the book they produced two years before. And they started at Wandlebury and sort of worked along down to Hatfield Forest and found all these sites, all megalithic miles apart, touching all these different stones, earth mounds, ring ditches similar to Wandlebury. There's a huge amount of stones. I'm really surprised the amount of stones that have been discovered on this site. As we'll see, that some of them were actually, they could have been stone circles because there's so many in such a small area. So their snappily titled book, I won't repeat that title again. And this is them, I think, at Wandlebury, doing a bit of surveying, like a press photograph. So this is a picture I got from Edmund. And it just shows you the line here on a modern map, very close to the M11. All these times we've been driving down the M11 and not realised how close it is to the actual Loxodrome itself, the alignment itself, with all these many sites upon it. So
possibility that may be true north at the time it was constructed.
Okay.
It needs more work doing on that.
Okay. So yeah, the fact that it could be a true north alignment as well, because it's the same in Wandlebury Ring.
Although it's a curve, but it's a line for the curve.
Yeah.
Of the Earth.
There's also the northern part of Wandlebury Ring, in the bank, the cut in the bank, I think it follows that as well. So there could be a clue to that. So, Brian's believe it was constructed 2500 BC to allow for astronomical observations to be made for the purposes of time determination, made visually, which is important to what they call meridian astronomy. So, and they also believed it could have been used to calculate the circumference of the Earth to a 1% accuracy. So we're looking at the possibility that this part of the landscape was actually used to first measure the Earth in antiquity, which is an very interesting idea. I think Archie Tom and Alexander Tom, they looked at their research, but they believe there are easier ways to measure the Earth, but who knows? So the definition of a loxodrome. Now, it is quite complicated, and anyone who tries to read this, it's quite tough going unless you really know all the different terminology for astronomy and astroarchaeology. But I've done my best. I'm not going to go into all the detail, the numbers and all that kind of thing, but I'll just give you an overview of what work they did and evidence to back that up. So a loxodrome, this is the definition from the book, is a line of the Earth's surface making a constant angle with the meridian, the construction of which requires knowledge of the Earth's dimensions. This includes all observations made for the purposes of time determination and its fundamental importance to astronomers. And it's not quite straight, as Edmund pointed out. It's a slight curve which equals the curvature of the Earth on this part of the Earth. That's correct, isn't it? Yeah. And but, as noted in their article in the Sunday Observer, whenever a person stood on the line between Wandlebury and another stone, or the far end stone, at Hatfield Broad Oak, the North Star would always be at the same oblique angle. So there's always they could all be observation points along the whole alignment, not just at Wandlebury. So these are the sites that you can actually visit. There are possibly 26, because there's 26 megalithic miles apart. And there's some of them fall precisely on the marker points of the alignment itself. Some are just off it, some are just at right angles to it, interestingly, which could be a clue that it was deliberately done like that. And these are the sites, and I've checked out all of these and found certain things there. We couldn't find the Priory Stone. I went there the other day with my friend Tony Charlton, who's the Essex megaliths expert, and we couldn't find it. We searched through people's gardens, we knocked on the door first. And the Hatfield Forest Complex, they've really done a lot of flattening of the area around there as well, unfortunately. We couldn't find much there, but we did manage to get some photos. A new one is the Stanstead Stone, which was discovered actually when they were building the new car park. We'll have a proper look at that in a moment, which is now moved and is now on display at Crossroads. So talk about that. Wilkins Mound, there's not much left of that either. The Widdington Stone, that's what they call the Springfield Stone. That's there, and most of them there's something there. But with Bordeaux Stone, that's vanished. Couldn't find that. It used to be. They spotted it in '76 when they were doing the research, but I had a good look for that as well. In near Bordeaux Farm, nothing there, no evidence. It's been used or buried or whatever. And Wandlebury, they claim there was a stone at Wandlebury as well, and you can actually see the top of it. And I've been sort of just trying to convince this archaeologist I know from Cherry Hill called Michelle Bullivant to organise a little dig there. We go and dig it up to see if this is a real stone, whether it's just part of a wall that was nearby. So there's all these interesting anomalies in this whole area, and there's quite a few other megaliths surrounding this as well, earth mounds, etc. So this is all the alignments they worked out of Wandlebury. It's quite complicated, as you can see. They haven't just done it from the centre, their research, they've done it from different points, aligning with the gaps in the banks. These are the three main ones here, or four main ones. The north one there, which is virtually on the alignment. And also there's a really interesting bulge here that goes about 7 metres out of the main circle, which has been noted by Alexander Tom in some of the other stone circles he's looked at throughout Britain. And it does help explain I'll talk about that in a moment. I've got a little bit more detail about that. Here is where they found, this area here is where they did this dig here, and they found post holes, large wooden post holes. They haven't excavated much of Wandlebury, so we can't give many clues to actually what was going on here. But if they were using posts here, then it does suggest an astronomical purpose, because we saw that, you know, with Patrick Taylor's talk and other research, that the ancient sites, there were many different examples of posts being used. It doesn't seem like they'd have a little house there or anything. It doesn't seem the right place to do it. And also, this is the main, what they think was the main entrance, which is the summer solstice alignment. And it's a processional entrance, which is very similar to Stonehenge, the main entrance there as well. So there's all these interesting anomalies here. This is the Line A loxodrome. This is the Line A itself. And they use these two circles here because they feel that this was used in a lot of different ancient sites. You wouldn't just do it from one point. You'd have a few different points to work from. And also, you can see that kind of thing at Avebury as well. But it's mainly this point here where the pond is, where a lot of the observations were taken from. So from this, there's lots of different alignments they were discovering. They found equinox alignments, summer solstice sunrises, summer moonrise maximums, lunar calendars, outer bank, observational points for all the different points of the year of the sun sets and sun rises and the moon sets, and even a 19-year lunar cycle as well. These are just close-ups of the post holes, and you can see them here, just southeast of the centre. Here's some archaeology which kind of backs it up. They found quite a lot of Neolithic artefacts there, lots of Bronze Age and Iron Age stuff as well. Definitely been occupied since the early Neolithic. The whole landscape around there has as well. It's not just Bronze Age or Iron Age as many people claim. It's an iron ring head. They've got these as well, which I think these were probably late Bronze Age. But they show the sort of horse myth as well, the whole thing about the Dark Knight at Wandlebury, possibly referencing the Chalk Hill figures as well. And there's some other archaeology here, like a comb. So these are the anomalies which the O'Briens pointed out with some other research which kind of backs this up. Now I'm going to have to go through this bit by bit because I really want to be clear on this. They think, you know, something the size of Wandlebury would take 600 men 130 days to build. So it's quite a large construction we're talking about here, including all the surrounding sort of parts as well. Constructed in 2 stages with substantial time differences between them. This has now been backed up by archaeologists when they've done digs there. 6 indentations in the outward bank for observing the sun, moon and the stars. It's a full solar year calendar and 19-year lunar calendar, which from their calculations is like 10 million to 1 odds of that being just chance. They constructed a large 3-4-5 triangle which could be accommodated with one line pointing towards a summer solstice gap, and the right angle of the line was on line A itself. So they think there could be, this goes back to the work of Alexander Thom again, using alignments, observational alignments with the loxodrome itself. And to the amazement, that same construction they were doing within the centre, they were just doing it with strings, I think, at the time. They found that the stone, the Wandlebury stone, which you can still see the top of today. There's also a linear ditch they discovered, which is up here, which no one's quite sure what that was for, and you can't really see it anymore. It's pretty much been flattened. But it aligns to the summer solstice and is pointing to possibly the original entranceway of the site. And also the bulge here on the east bank, which goes about 7 metres out, has the wooden posts, and it's an azimuth of 107 degrees, which marks 30 days after the autumn equinox of 2500 BC. So this is how they managed to get a precise date of the site, along with all the other observations they were making as well. So we've seen it's quite a complex design we're looking at here. There's a lot going on, and it really does tie in with Alexander Thom's geometry and astroarchaeology research. There's also a huge amount of archaeology which has been discovered since the O'Brien's research, which is backing this place up as a Neolithic site. It's definitely used, even very early Neolithic as well. So we are looking at the possibility that there's a huge amount of evidence to back up the O'Brien's theory now. There's more coming to light. There's an archaeologist, county archaeologist called Mark Hinman, who I've been speaking to, and he's convinced the whole landscape was a ritual kind of astronomical landscape which was inhabited by very advanced, sophisticated people from what he's found there. So again, we're looking at more evidence there. So Further down the line, there's a few between Wandlebury and Hatfield Forest. There's there's nothing at a lot of the points, the 26 possible points. There are about 13 that you can find things at. The first one you can see something at is the Great Chesterford Stone, which is a pretty badly eroded remnant, and it's directly on line A, interestingly. But it's 14 metres along from where it should be. 14 metres is not really that much, but the accuracy of some of the O'Brien's research is really startling. It's almost like centimetres. Some of the sites are just absolutely perfectly in place along their proposed line A, each being megalithic miles apart. So 14 metres is quite a long way off, so we look at that as a kind of gauge for how accurate some of their research is. And you can see it's just embedded into a bit of concrete here, but it's still there though. I mean, I talked to a few locals, none of them knew anything about it, they didn't even know it existed. So I kind of went there just with my mum, and we kind of found it pretty quickly. Ring Hill is a little bit further down. I can't remember which number it is, but Ring Hill, this is a very interesting place. Very unusual design as well. You can see it here on the map. Audley ends here. There's a stone just here as well, which we'll have a look at in a moment. This is up here, actually on the hill, just on the edge, looking over Audley End itself. Again, it's a great big henge, like a ditch, all the way around. Badly eroded, like I said, but again, you can see line A, how accurately, right through the centre, is right on it, right on line A again. And the O'Briens believe that's a very significant point along the alignment, because also from Wandlebury this is right up on the top of a hill, you can see the two sites before the trees. They planted loads of trees here as well, and they planted them all over Wandlebury. There used to be nothing there, it was all just grassland. And you can see one from the other, which to me really backs this up, you know. This was remarked by archaeologists back in the early 1900s. So again, there's quite a few anomalies here, interesting geometry, and the circular perpetual choirs, which really interest me, because this is some discoveries by John Michell, who's one of my kind of gurus of the earth mysteries. It's a geometric construction. Again, they found on-lapping arcs around a 3-4-5 triangle. Again, you've got a triangle here. And they think that it was based around line A, because of the accuracy of the line, and even all these were based around the line itself. But it's also, this site is the centre of, it's the dead centre of the circle of perpetual choirs, or the eastern circle, which would be around here, which was discovered by John Michell, and you can see the ones right here, there's Stonehenge, and there's Glastonbury, and many other sites. The centre of this circle is the Malvern Hills, whereas the centre of this one is Ring Hill. And line A, this isn't line A here, that's just to confuse you. Line A is about here, and goes through the centre of it. And also, the sites that they think were used around the circle of perpetual choirs, and there's some early references to this as well. This isn't just modern thought. This is very early references to the circle of perpetual choir. That there used to be, in ancient times, they used to be chanting and singing constantly around all the different sites throughout the year. So it would be the art of enchanting the landscape, which is a beautiful idea, and I think this is something we could get back into. There's enough of us kind of into the singing stuff, Carolyn Caberti in particular. Who's not with us today, I understand. Again, the other really more dark side of Ring Hill, this is quite intrigued me as well. It was actually used by Matthew Watkins, the witch finder general, to carry out executions of witches, right next to the main ring. But luckily, it's now been completely healed by Giles Bryant and the World Healing Project, so no worries there. That's all gone. That's all sorted out. But it's quite remarkable. In the 70s, people noticed there's something wrong with the energy out there. Some sensitives went up there, and found. And then they started researching it and found he actually used this. And the realisation is that perhaps he knew about the circle of perpetual choirs. Perhaps he had some understanding of this alignment. And it's a way of geomantically influencing the people from a centre point of a powerful great earth circle, if you like. So I find that quite intriguing myself. Yeah, and you can see Wandlebury from Ring Hill itself. And just next to, I haven't got the picture here. Just next to here, there's a stone actually in just outside Audley End. It's not. I forgot to put the image in, but there's a great big stone just outside the entrance to Audley End. If anyone goes down, you have to go down the road towards Carolyn's house. Funnily enough, but these are, if you go a little bit further along the line, you come to Littlebury Village. Beautiful little village. I always drive that way to and from London to Cambridge now, along the A11. And these are just some of the remarkable stones that I found there. And there's 3 here in the garden. There's actually about 5 in this garden. And there's another one just outside on the road. There's 2 more in another garden, and then there's another one. There's about 9 or 10 stones in Littlebury itself. Remarkable. They're all sarsen stones as well. They're all quite sort of really hardened sandstone. Some of them have been shaped, which is like a tradition. They noticed along the alignment they were shaped in certain ways. We'll have a look at the shaping of them soon. But I believe, they were part of a stone circle. It just makes so much sense. It really does. Because you've got Wandlebury Ring. I mean, Carolyn believes that the stones were all up at Wandlebury Ring, but I'm not so sure about that. I think that they all seem to be right in the Littlebury village itself. Here's some other ones. These ones are in a different garden, just down the road. It's actually, I almost rented the place out, that place, but went. There's 3 other stones in the same garden. This one's in the same one as well. This is the back of this one. Look at the face on it. Sort of 2, nose, mouth. I quite like that. A bit of simulacra.
On a triangle.
Huh?
On a triangle.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't know if that was carved in or it's a natural formation. But they're quite chunky, a good ton there at least. But there's another stone, another famous stone that got moved from Littlebury, which would probably be stone 10 or 11, so it's quite a few, called the Hangman Stone. And this was moved by Jabez Gibson in the early 1800s, who was a geologist and horticulturalist from Saffron Walden, and he moved it into his sort of mansion gardens.
Right.
And luckily, you can still see it in the same place. It's like a folly. And he built this. Apparently, he built this mound, but some people believe something may have already been there. That's why he chose that bit of land to live on. And you can see it here. It's a massive, great thing. It's got a big hole in it, which was actually they had to do that to move it. And there it is. And there's some other stones here as well, which are smaller, which also got moved from Littlebury. So there's possibly up to 15 stones. Again, it's just getting ridiculous, Littlebury. I'm really intrigued by this. And also there's actually a little story that goes with this as well. The whole idea of, because it's called the Hangman Stone. I can just read this out to you, I've got it in my notes here. One night, it's called the Sheep Stealer Stone as well, as you can see. One night a sheep stealer took a sheep and tied its legs together against this large stone. The sheep began to struggle and slipped over the far side of the stone. Hang on a sec. Ultimately strangling the thief. The next morning the 2 were discovered hanging on each side of the stone, with a deep indentation running across the top of the stone caused by the rope's friction during the dying pair's struggle, which is really nice. But this is actually, they've noted this legend as well in different parts of the country. There's a stone in Berkshire called the Hangman Stone, and there's a couple of other stones, out in the Midlands and up north as well, which have the same story, exactly the same story associated with it. So what that means, who knows? But you can see that there's definitely something going on with Littlebury and all the stones there. We move further along the line, we get to Wendon's Ambo. And this was the stone that the O'Briens talk about in their book. But I found a few other stones there as well, quite large ones as well, all sarsens again. This one here, and these are just a few, about 150 yards away from this one. These 2 and another one are all together within a 100-foot radius, or 100-foot sort of circumference. This one here, another simulacra. I quite like the face, little eyes, nose. Beautiful, beautiful. And you get a lot of this. You get a lot of the stones in Essex are built into walls like this. So they do, so they probably haven't been moved far because they're so heavy. So we can guess that they were pretty much, and this is all pretty much, the first stone we looked at was on the alignment as well. There's a massive stone on the entrance to Wendon's Ambo as well. And this is Uttlesford Mutlow. This is a very interesting little place. This is a sort of earth mound that was discovered there, was on part of the alignment. This is Joy O'Brien and also the owner of the land. A little dragon phoenix sort of looking after it. Uttlesford Mutlow, it's got a bit of a history. Its another name is Moatlaw, where mound moots were held. In medieval writings it was called a barrow, and it's also the meeting place of the Uttlesford 100. It's exactly 12 megalithic miles from Wandlebury. It's absolutely bang on 12 megalithic miles as well, so it's very accurate positioning. There's actually 2 mounds in the garden though, because this is the one that Joy, we went out searching, this is the one that Joy thought was the mound here, and that's actually on the alignment. But when we just walked around the corner into their main garden, we saw this. It was a beautiful, so whether, you know, whether that was the one, or whether there was 2 there, whether it was built as a copy of that, I don't know. But that is there, and it's been worked with. It could be a later edition, but it's just a little bit too much of a coincidence for my liking. And also you get beautiful views from here of the landscape as well, sort of looking south, along the alignment, funnily enough. So we go a bit further along, we come to the famous leper stone, or what the O'Briens call the Short Grove monolith. There's quite a few stories associated with this one as well. It really is quite big. It's probably 2 or 3 tons. It's a monster, really, and it's just on the main road. You can just drive by it, have a little wave at it, whatever you want to do. It's polished and shaped, and there were other stones found behind this in what was called the hospital farm, which is also called a leper hospital. There's no evidence that it was actually a leper hospital, so they think it could have derived from leaping stone, which is another kind of thing we find across the country as well, where stones move by themselves or are moved by giants in the middle of the night. So that could be where the name came from, not necessarily leper stone. But it is said, though, in some later stories, that lepers would place orders for food and money on the top of the stones in the hollow bit here. Yeah. And then there'd be water there as well, and then the people would then take it and go and buy the stuff get the stuff they needed and bring it back and place it there. And they thought the stone would cleanse any of the leprosy to make sure the other people wouldn't get it. So there's a whole story associated with that. Although this also could be the ancient art of venerating the stone, sort of placing offerings on it as well. It could be just a reproduction of that in more modern medieval times. So we don't know. There's not really any solid evidence to work that one out. But it's exactly halfway along the Loxodrome. It's the 13th stone from Wandlebury, and also the 13th stone from the other end, the Priory stone. 5 foot tall, over 3 tons. Technically, it's brown, iron-stained quartzitic sandstone, skillfully shaped into a near trapezoidal form with 2 vertical parallel sides and 2 vertical and 2 sloping faces. And also, it fell over in a storm quite a while ago, and they were worried that if it wasn't raised again, it would spell disaster for Newport. So there's an old legend that it actually holds the energy of Newport, a little bit like the London stone does for London. So we're seeing similar stories, different stones in the east part of the country. So the Newport stone, this is the 14th marker point on line A. This is a pudding stone conglomerate, 17 metres off the alignment, and they think there was once a small mound there, just where the train station's been built. And they think the stone could have sat on top of that quite easily, but they don't know if the mound was more of a modern construction or no idea when it was built. But I went past here a couple of weeks ago, and I saw some surveyors were doing some work around there. And I asked them if they're building sort of just nearby, and I asked them if they're going to move the stone, and they said no, they're going to leave it exactly where it is. So it's probably good that it does stay there. So this is what the O'Briens call the Springfield stone. It's also called the Widdington stone as well. It has a very flat front to it. It's quite large, and the O'Briens believe it could have been a pointer along the alignment to other sites. It's just off the alignment. It's a right angle to where it should be, as such. So it could have been placed there deliberately to mark something going off at a right angle from the actual alignment itself. This is the Stansted stone, which is not in the original work of the O'Briens, but it does. Where it was discovered, it was only a few hundred yards away from where it should have been. It was actually found in a settlement they found when they were digging and preparing for the new Stansted Airport car park, the second car park there, which has now been constructed. And Joy went a lot. She was actually involved, and Edmund was involved in the kind of when it was being discovered, and got reports. I've got all the reports here actually, copied from Joy O'Brien. And it was a whole part of Bronze Age settlement found in the centre of it. But also they found lots of Neolithic and early Neolithic finds there as well, skeletons. In that whole kind of, it was like a complex. It wasn't just one. And I think this stone could have been the stone at the centre of their, complex. For what its purpose, we don't know. But it's not that far, and it's the same shape and similar size to many of the other Loxodrome stones. So again, we think it is part of that. And this was a couple of years ago. This photo was taken with me and Joy there. It's the first time I went out with her on the Loxodrome, and we didn't know, we were talking about where this sandstone got moved to. We were trying to get in touch with the geologists and the people who did the digs there. And we were driving through Tately sort of crossroads, which is near Hatfield Forest. And we spotted the stone there. We couldn't believe it. They'd actually placed it very close to the Loxodrome alignment. Remarkably close. I don't know how far exactly, we haven't worked it out yet. But and they put on the sign that it's a sarsen found at the Bronze Age dig at Stansted Car Park. So he's been honoured in a way, So I think it's a good thing. So then we move into Hatfield Forest, and this is a picture of Christian O'Brien standing on one of the stones in the lake, which I think must be this one. It's obviously toppled over slightly. And these are two massive, could have been one stone according to the O'Briens, this one, massive standing stone, it's the same as them two. There's this one here as well. And these are just to the side of the lake where they think the kind of circular construction would have been. But let's have a look at a picture of that. Oh no, I don't think I've got it in there. But there's basically in this lake here. Brian, back in the 70s, which you can't really see it now, I had a good look around. There is some evidence of ditches around the area. We'll have a look at some photos in a minute. But it's like a circular earthwork actually within the lake, and it's a third bigger than Wandlebury. So it's an extra kind of 300 yard bigger sort of size than Wandlebury. And it's directly on the Loxodrome alignment as well, it would have been. And these stones are very close to it, all part of the same complex, but it's been kind of, everything's kind of been moved around. Luckily, back in the medieval times when they were flattening landscapes and cutting down forests and all this kind of thing, this was bought by someone who looked after it, and lots of the constructions within the forest were kept as they were. Lots of the old trees were kept as well. So luckily, there's probably more here than there could have been. So this is 8 Once Way. This is a little bit further up in the same Hatfield Forest area. You can see here, there's an old sort of series of crossroads here. You can see this on the map, and there's just some photos of it. But the Hatfield, the line bisects perfectly through the centre of it, absolutely perfectly. So we think this was possibly an old meeting point, an old trackway that where people from different parts of the country would meet. Very big kind of central area as well. So these are I noticed some of the ditches and earthworks just near the lake, which I believe are part of the original earth bank construction of the ring that was there. But there's hardly any evidence of that left now, unfortunately. Here's some more here. I found this quite interesting. I couldn't find. This is actually just found this very close to where the circular ditch could have been, but I'm not sure if this is a modern thing and they've just shoved a load of soil over there and redone it. I don't know, but kind of grabbed my attention. But there are quite a few, there's Portingbury Hills within Hatfield Forest as well, again, which it's off the alignment, but it's right angles to it, and they find more of the geometry with the 3, 4, 5 triangles associating the hills with the alignment itself. So what they were doing there, it sounds quite complex surveying, astronomical surveying. And they also found at Portingbury Hills that some of them have summer solstice and equinox observation alignments as well. So again, this kind of verifies the whole idea of this part of the Loxodrome. This is from the Hatfield Forest Wandlebury book. Just shows you the characteristic shape of many of the stones, which seem to fit to this quite closely. You can see the basic shape in the vertical section. So the O'Briens believe the upper part was like a scalene triangle, the middle part was a right angle triangle, and the lower part a basal rectangle, whatever that is. Alternatively, it may be described as a scalene triangle over a trapezoid, just to simplify it. But I don't know if they're actually shaped that tightly. But they all follow this similar design, which is very interesting. This is Christian O'Brien at Hatfield Forest again, just with some original photos from the 70s, which appeared in the Sunday Observer magazine. And this is just a little quote from the Book of Enoch, which really intrigues me. So we've kind of come to the end of the Loxodrome now. So this keeps popping back into my mind, this quote from the Book of Enoch, which is an ancient writing. delivered by the archangel Uriel to Enoch. It's a very long story, and this goes back into some of the early Sumerian stuff, stuff found in Qumran and so forth. But this quote, just, I believe it's part of this is to do with the Loxodrome partly, as well as other sites around the world. And I saw in those days how long cords were given to the angels, or the angels, another name for the people who were doing this kind of construction all around the world. And they took themselves wings and flew. Did they have helicopters or planes? Or something? I don't know. And went towards the north, which is possibly England. And I asked an angel, saying unto him, why have they taken cords and gone off? And he replied, they have gone to measure. I mean, to me that says a lot, that this Loxodrome line was part of a measuring system for time, for calendars, for working out the circumference of the Earth, and many other things as well, probably, that we haven't quite cracked yet. Anyway, there's some other sites near Wandlebury. I'm probably running a bit over my time soon, so I'm going to have to go through this fairly swiftly. But we've seen that there's a lot of evidence, there's new evidence to back up the Loxodrome theory, the whole idea of this alignment of stones stretching throughout Essex and Cambridgeshire, along the Cam Valley, where the River Cam sort of follows down. But when you start looking at the complex, especially around Wandlebury, I really have found there's a lot of other sites there which back up the theory, which I want to keep reminding people of. This is the War Ditches. This is just at the top of Lincoln Hill, just next to my school playing field. Now they've built a big, there's nothing there anymore, it's just a chalk pit. They've just used it to steal chalk from, to build the colleges. And these are the massive skeletons they found, sort of 7 or 8 feet tall, some of them, which they think, why were they so tall? And this is possibly, they're not sure, but they think this is early, sort of late Neolithic as well, or early Bronze Age, some of them. They kind of vary. They found a huge amounts of skeletons all across the landscape between the War Ditches and Wandlebury. It's only about a mile or so away from Wandlebury, towards Cherry Hinton. Perfectly circular. It's exactly half the size of Wandlebury. It's 500 feet wide. As east-west entrances, and this is where the burials were, funnily enough, just towards the south. This shows you the positioning of it, which is here, and this is Wandlebury. This is Cherry Hinton. This is the Giant's Grave, and that's where the Giant's Grave stone is in the Robin Hood car park. This is some other circular earthworks they found as well, just here and over here, and they found some over here, just off the picture near Addenbrooke's. So there's circular earthworks all around this area. There's quite a lot going on. This intrigues me because they found a massive post hole right in the middle of it, which would have been, a massive kind of megalithic sort of wooden post, really, which could have been an observation point, but it's actually at the bottom of the hills there, so it might not have been much. Here, there was 2 tumuli here, one there, one there. And there's an old pathway going between Wandlebury and the War Ditches. The War Ditches is probably not the right original name, obviously, for it, but people think that the War Ditches is Fleet Dyke or something like that, but it's not correct. And then over here, you've got the whole load of other earthworks and ritual complexes that's recently been excavated by Mark Hinman, the county archaeologist. This is the only surviving photo of the War Ditch circle here. That's all you get, that's all there is. It's about that big. It's all been completely quarried, nothing left at all, totally disrespected. I know they put foam masts and tetra masts up on that hill as well, which is a bit depressing. Anyway. So this is the Abraham Road site, which we looked at just a moment ago. It's along the road between kind of Wandlebury and the War Ditches. Wandlebury here, the area here we're looking at now, and the War Ditches there. So this just gives you some idea. Little Tree Hills here, which is another barrow. But here they found some really interesting stuff. Let me just grab my notes on this. I'm just clear. Basically, the Archaeological Field Unit of Cambridgeshire County Council, Mark Hinman's been leading it, is the main archaeologist there. They found a mile northwest of Wandlebury. They found Neolithic grooveware pottery there, which always interests me. The skeletons dating back between 2205 and 1895 BC. They're remarkably similar to ones found within Wandlebury, which are previously thought to be Iron Age in origin, but now they think that the whole area is actually Neolithic now, so it really does redate Wandlebury completely. Whether they're going to actually make that an official thing soon, we hope that might be the case, that they're going to completely redate it in all their literature. They found some mutilated bodies there. They found elaborate entranceways, so that kind of gives it a ritualistic nature. They think it's, they had fence lines, interrupted ditches, controlled ceremonial burial, and there's a whole flank, the hill is flanked on 3 sides with ancient routeways, and it makes it, what they say here, they makes it a natural choice for location of a special and perhaps unique monument. So, and this is just where the park and ride is now. So again, there's nothing left. They keep doing this, don't they? But also, it's very near 9 Wells as well, which is where there's another natural spring, just near Adam Brooks Hospital, which is linked as well. It's linked to the spring in Wandlebury, and it was also a source of water for the whole of Cambridge and the whole area. So again, we're looking at this whole complex around this area. 9 Wells, I think, is over here somewhere, over this area kind of thing. And there's some other ring ditches found here. So there's ring ditches here, here, sort of here, Little Trees Hill. It's just a huge amount going on over this whole area, and I really think, if they were going to do this Loxodrome thing, it would take many years. It would take at least 19 years to do, to follow all the moon cycles. You have to do it for 19 years to get it correct. So if they're going to live here, this is where they would live, in this area here. They've got enough water to go around. Nearby it's quite a lush greenery, so they've got like places they can grow food, etc. But right, it's an interesting point. I want to throw this in because this has just been blowing me away recently. The idea that Wandlebury was the original site of Troy. Now this is a theory put together by Iman Wilkins. I hear a few sniggers in the crowd there. But Plato was convinced that the Trojan sagas had no place in Greece. So we're going to look at some evidence to back up this first before I start sort of showing you exactly where it was. There's also a 5th century Greek historian who believed that nothing in Greece reached great proportions, the wars no more than anything else. There's also, they said that it was of Celtic ancestry, and Wilkins claims that this is the link between Troy, Greece and Asia Minor, that Celtic peoples migrating south took their history with them, and in time it became entwined with that of the Greeks themselves, eventually surfacing in Homer's enduring epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey. In 1790, Wernsdorf identified the Cimmerians mentioned as by Homer as Celtic. H. Voss in 1804 concluded that the Odyssey was partly set in the British Isles due to its geographical features. There's also the theory that that the stories began in Troy and were based in Cambridge. So there's all these little bits of evidence suggesting Troy was in Cambridge. And this is what, but Iman Wilkins had been reading the Iliad and the Odyssey since he was a child. He got obsessed by it completely, and he kept looking at it. It didn't make any sense that it was in Greece or Turkey or anything like that. And he started exploring, trying to find clues, and he eventually came to Wandlebury and Cherry Hinton, where I grew up, and he believes it's there. And he's found huge amounts of evidence, including the evidence we've just found at the Babraham Road site of lots of Bronze Age activity there, as well as Neolithic. And also the place names. When you start looking at the place names around this whole area, you start seeing the sort of phonetics of words that were then taken and added to Greek places and Turkish places much later. And he's got a really strong theory about this. I don't know if it'll ever be accepted, even if more evidence comes forth. But the geographical and linguistic evidence, as well as the countless archaeological finds, really do back up this theory. He believes the war was not waged by Greeks and not caused by the abduction of Helen. He believes the real reason was access to tin in Britain, a precious metal which was essential for the production of bronze, which is a key material at that time for warmongering. And during the 2nd millennium BC, there was a custom of illiterate sea peoples migrating from Western Europe to verbally pass on history, and that's how the Great Wars, they believe, were first recorded. But there's no real evidence being found in Turkey, where they claim Troy is supposed to have been. This shows you a map of where Wilkins believes it all is. Obviously, you've got Wandlebury here, Limekiln Hill, which are the war ditches. You've got other ditches, you've got other stuff happening, like the Giant's Grave. This is the Giant's Grave, basically, in Wandlebury. Tumuli marking it, Cambridge there. Fleam Dyke there, which is a very interesting, massive earthwork, and there's the Devil's Dyke and others further up. This is a more intricate map. There's my mum standing on Fleam Dyke. This is it here as well. And this is his more detailed map. If he believes when you start looking at the story in detail, you can actually plan it out precisely around this whole area. So obviously this was much later than, you know, the Loxodrome and the Neolithic kind of research we've been looking at, but it's just a very interesting point I had to throw in there, because if this is for real, then it's going to, you know, this is potentially rewrite history time, isn't it? It shows you Fleam Dyke here. There's also quite other ones nearer Wandlebury. Devil's Dyke. We've got another dyke here. It's just, and these are huge. I mean, these are massive constructions. These weren't for the faint-hearted. And there's a whole load of. I don't even want to begin to go into the details of this, because it's a whole other talk really. But there's some evidence. They found lots and lots of swords and shields, all Bronze Age. A huge amount of skeletons scattered across the whole Gog and Gog hills, especially near the war ditches, which they think could have been a camp for Troy itself. There's also older papyruses that are found, which are in Phoenician alphabet, which talk about similar stories about Troy as well. So we can look further back, even than the Iliad and the Odyssey. So it's just a couple of. This is the shield they found as well, which is not in Cambridgeshire. Beautiful Bronze Age shield, which you can see in the museum at the moment. Just a couple of quick quotes here before we move on. Professor Sir Moses Finlay, who studied ancient history at Cambridge, expresses the view that the weight of evidence made it clear that Troy and the Trojan War did not occur in the Greek or Turkish setting. So he's getting people, you know, top people to back him up. And there's Professor P.H. Damps, speech and language pathology, and he believes valuable knowledge is to be discovered about the people of northwest Europe around 1200 BC, how they navigated the oceans, and a great war between the kings of continental Europe and the Trojan kings in England, who held a monopoly on tin mining in Cornwall. Such information is encoded in the Iliad and the Odyssey. So he's getting these kind of people to back him up now, and he's just republished this book as well. So this is another megalith that Joy actually showed me, Joy O'Brien showed me. It's in Linton, which is not far, really, from it's not far from Wandlebury, just a couple of miles down the road. It's just along the A103. It looks like it's been worked as well, and Joy noticed this. Very similar to one of the Loxodrome stones. She's not suggesting it was on the Loxodrome alignment, because it's well off it, obviously, but she believes there's possibly more stones there as well. And there's also excavations in 2005 in Linton, which is revealed that the late Neolithic pits containing worked flint in association with grooved ware pottery and animal bone, and also a ring ditch there as well. So we're looking at another ring ditch a few miles down the road from Wandlebury. Again, it's this grooved ware pottery keeps popping back, because I believe this has got something to do with the kind of people who built many of these constructions. 10 minutes, yeah. Yes, I'm very intrigued by this. The more you look through Cambridge and you look through these different sites in the whole area, you find more of this. They found at the Babering Road site, they found some Cherry Hinton, Linton, and throughout East Anglia. And there's lots of people. I mean, there's a great book called Uriel's Machine, which talks about how these people were. These are the clues left by the megalithic builders, but they're speculative, so I'm not going to go too far into that. So the rich, sacred landscape of Cambridgeshire. It really, you know, from my research and from me moving away from Cambridge, I've actually been able to find all these things out from a different perspective, and came up with this research. And I'm very, you know, very pleased and inspired by Joy O'Brien, especially, and Edmund, who've been looking at this stuff over many years, and we've come to some interesting conclusions about the landscape here, especially when we have the archaeologists backing up the theory. It's not just me trying to convince people. We've got archaeologists who I'm spending time with, I'm learning stuff from them, and they love all this stuff. They've looked at the Loxodrome, they've looked at the Troy theories, they looked at the idea of an astronomical observatory, and they're kind of taking note. So hopefully this could be a slow shift in the consciousness of the historical archaeological world towards this kind of thinking. Obviously you have people like Alexander Thom, way ahead of their time, too far ahead of their time really. Even Robin Heath, too far ahead of his time. He really does push a few buttons with his research. But I believe it's time to have another look at, especially around this part of the landscape, especially with, you know, when we have the Mary line, which connects directly with Avebury, Silbury Hills. So there's clues there that is part of the same thing. Cambridge Ley, which goes from one mound to another on the other side of town. Classic ley line, going through very, very important sites, through Wandlebury itself. And obviously the Loxodrome, which goes, you know, possibly does go past Wandlebury north, and maybe it does go to the megalith in Cherry Hinton. Interestingly, I noticed the lockstone actually virtually goes through my mum's house and possibly through my bedroom that I grew up with. So that kind of intrigued me as well. Kind of freaked me out, in fact. You know, strange things like that do seem to happen. So we'll just summarise here. Obviously the crop circle, I had to put that in there because it's a beautiful design. So there's lots of evidence now supporting the loxodrome thesis. There's lots of evidence, and I think we need to re-evaluate and rewrite all the O'Brien's work, put it back out there in a fresh context with the support of Joy and Edmund and others. And I think it really needs to be done. And I think, you know, there are clues that it was an observatory, an astronomical observatory, used by the ancients, especially in the Tuatha De Danann stories, the Ogma of sun learning especially. I mean, that really gets me. That, you know, the whole Gog or Og name is associated with that. And how Osbert fought the night and the wound reopened every summer solstice. Again, that's another clue that it was a summer solstice observation point. The Mary line passing through Wandlebury and all the way down to Silver Hill and Avebury. Real giants, we've seen them, the skeletons. Chalk Hill figures and the clues in the crop circles. And Mark Hinman, who I think, you know, it'd be worth us all meeting him if you're really into this stuff, suggests that the Neolithic ritual landscape is proved by archaeology, burials and alignments. He really believes that. So, were the Watchers really here? Were they really in this part of the world doing this work? I believe the answer is yes. So I asked, was this 26-mile megalithic alignment designed and constructed by the same people who built the Avebury complex around 2500 BC? The answer is yes, probably. This is all in honour, this research, of Christian O'Brien and Joy O'Brien. Thank you very much. Go from Wandlebury because the loxodrome initially, Christian O'Brien was quite inspired by a talk he went to about ley lines and about Alfred Watkins' theory. So we're going to have a look at some other leys around that area as well, and also the earth energies, particularly obviously the Mary energy line and the Avebury and Silbury Hill connections. And very interestingly, there's a book called Where Troy Once Stood, which claims that the whole Troy saga, the Iliad and the Odyssey, and the whole great wars that took place in the Bronze Age actually based at Wandlebury and that whole Gog Magog Hills area. And I was quite intrigued by that because I've been talking to a couple of archaeologists in Cambridge who claim that there's a huge amount of evidence to now back that up. And the new version of his book, Ivan Wilkins, he's building the case very well. We'll have a look at some of the key points of that a little bit later. So I'm really asking, were the megalithic builders of Wandlebury, were these people who built the ancient sites, the famous ancient sites all across Britain and possibly the world, actually in our local landscape of East Anglia? This is a nice painting by Richard Relham from 1801, which shows you the kind of basic, it's quite an exaggerated version of what the hill fort actually looks like. It's basically a large ring ditch, but this is very exaggerated. This looks more like Avebury at a glance, doesn't it? But I just wanted to show you this is how it was seen back in the early 1800s. But Wandlebury itself is based upon the I'm really grateful to be here again at the Stars and Stones Forum. I was lucky enough to be here at the first one as well, talking about my other area of research, which is based upon earth energies and scientific analysis of how they used them for seed production in ancient times. But today I'm coming back to my hometown of Cambridge, where I was brought up and lived there for the first 25 years of my life. Since the age of 8 years old, I lived in Cherry Hinton, which is a small village not far from Wandlebury, and I always used to go up Wandlebury as a child and as a teenager and in my early 20s as well for various other things, and I was very drawn to the place, had a real good feeling about it. It's always been regarded as an Iron Age hill fort by the archaeologists and historians of the area, but the research of the O'Briens, Christian and Barbara Joy O'Brien, in the 70s has kind of rewritten, it's helped rewrite the history of this place, and it's stimulated a whole area of research for myself and others at Wandlebury. When I was quite young, I did hear of stories about a place called the Giant's Grave, which is at the other end of Cherry Hill, at the base of the Gog's Hill, and there's a spring there as well. And there was a story that giants were buried there, and they actually found skeletons. And I kept hearing about this, but I kind of thought nothing of it. I thought it was just some kind of myth. But recently I found research across the landscape, and also obviously it connects directly with Avebury and Glastonbury. And I now live in Glastonbury partly because of this, just to sort of continue various research down there. And interestingly, when I first went to Glastonbury about 6 years ago now, it was actually on the tail of the Girt Dog of Langport. I actually got given a copy of this book. I didn't know anything about it before, and this is the snappily titled book by Christian and Barbara Joy O'Brien, called An Integrated Astronomical Complex of Earthworks at Wandlebury in Hatfield Forest from the 3rd millennium BC, published in 1976. So the first day I ever went and experienced the Glastonbury Zodiac, which Yuri talked about earlier, I went to the tail of the Girt Dog of Langport, and David Hatfield gave me this book immediately. I just couldn't believe it. It was kind of like one of them beautiful synchronicities. It really helped open up, my area of research at Wandlebury. So it's that whole thing where you have to go a long way away to another part of the sacred landscape of your home country to actually find stuff about your hometown and your home sacred sites. So and to look at it from another perspective, it really enabled me to look at it clearly and from a sort of, just stand back and actually re-look at the landscape. And since then, the research and the megalithic finds have just cascaded. And I met Edmund Marriage as well, through Nigel Blair, and the research has really opened up. So there's a whole load of different aspects I really want to look at today. Oh, excuse me a second. I'm actually on the top of Limekiln Hill, which is just past Wandlebury, just past Cherry Hill, on the way to Wandlebury. There's a site that was excavated in about over 100 years ago, and actually did find some giant skeletons there. So the Giant's Grave theory, which has been sort of floating around at the school, because our school, Netherhall, was actually on the side of the Gog's Hills. It kind of became, we didn't really know anything about it, but just at the top of the hill we used to go running in and playing in as kids. It was actually a very ancient site, which it was termed the War Ditches, which we'll have a look at this site as well later. But further over the hills, towards Great Shelford and Stapleford, we have Wandlebury, which is the site I'm going to be focusing on today. So when I first read a book called The Son of the Serpent by Hamish Miller and Paul Broadhurst, this really opened up a whole avenue of research for me. I was never interested in history at school. I don't know anyone who was, actually. But for me, I found it incredibly boring. All the kings of Britain, who won the wars, no interest at all. I wasn't compelled. I didn't want to look any further into the past. I read the book The Son of the Serpent, and that opened up a whole avenue of understanding about the subtle nature of history and the way the ancients actually worked with the landscape, and they worked with these sacred sites. And I quickly noticed that Wandlebury was actually on the Mary line, the famous energy line of the Son of the Serpent fame, and this really triggered a whole awakening for me into this area of subtle energies. Mainly, obviously, at the research of Christian and Barbara Joy O'Brien, and evidence which backs up their claims that there was this incredible megalithic alignment stretching from Wandlebury all the way down to Hatfield Forest, which virtually follows the M11, if anyone knows that motorway. So I'm really asking, was this 26-mile alignment designed and built by the same people who built Avebury, Silbury Hill and the early part of Stonehenge? Because according to the O'Briens, we are looking at a similar time frame, which is roughly 2500 BC. And there's quite a few other aspects we can look at as well. For instance, there's a whole story about Wandlebury, really, that stretches back for different eras of history, going back about 5,000 years. So first of all, I'm going to look at the landscape of the Gog Hills and have a look at what that name really means, and the giants and how they're associated with that. And also other legends associated with that, and the discovery of Chalk Hill figures, which Tom Lethbridge, or T.C. Lethbridge, discovered in the 1950s, which are very controversial because the archaeologists and historians aren't having it. They're basically saying he made them up. But we'll have a quick look at that as well. And obviously the logs of drainage alignment, we'll have a good look at that, and new discoveries on it, and Neolithic evidence to back that up. And even the archaeologists are now saying the whole Wandlebury area is actually a Neolithic ritual landscape, and it's not just a single so-called Iron Age hill fort, according to other earlier historians. So we're going to look at some other ley lines, or straight line alignments, which